North Timber Ridge, Montana, late October 1894. Early winter winds poured down the valley from the Madison Range at 25-30 miles per hour, whipping the cracked dry ground like a warning that the cold season would arrive earlier than any year before. While families hurried to finish their 12-inch thick log cabins before the snow fell, a solitary figure appeared on the eastern hillside. Widow Eleanor Maddox was digging deep into the earth. No walls going up, no roof being raised, just relentlessly scooping layer after layer of frozen soil into a tunnel heading southeast. Neighbors passing by would stop. From pitying whispers to open mocking laughter, grave home, cave madness. Living underground in Montana means dying early. Those phrases repeated every day as Eleanor's pit grew deeper, from 3 feet to 5 feet, then 7 feet, nearly 8 feet wide like the entrance to an abandoned mine. Some thought the pain of losing her husband had broken her. Others believed a woman couldn't build a shelter safe enough for the brutal mountain winter here. But they didn't see what Eleanor always carried: the memory of that January night in 1893. A storm rolled down from Yellowstone, gusts hitting 40-45 miles per hour, their cabin shaking as if being lifted off its foundation. The wooden roof tore away, minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, cold blasting straight into the room. Her husband trying to pull the tarp back but getting knocked down by the wind. The next morning, he was frozen solid under nearly 2 feet of snow. Her young son turned blue, his breathing so faint that Eleanor had to hold him against her body all night. From that night on, winter for her wasn't just weather, it was the thief that stole her entire family. So while others built cabins, Eleanor chose the earth. She understood what no one asked. About 5 feet below Montana's frozen surface, soil temperature stays steady around 46-48 degrees Fahrenheit, even when the air drops to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. She measured wind direction with cloth strips tied to pine branches, chose a digging spot where northwest winds had trouble sweeping in, used a 32-inch steel shovel and a 4-pound pickaxe to open the chamber. The people of Timber Ridge didn't care about those calculations. They just saw a widow, a hole, and concluded she had lost her mind. But Eleanor remembered her husband's words. The earth holds warmth. Wind kills. And she believed. Each time the shovel struck hard soil, memories of the blizzard rushed back like a reminder that she had to live differently. When the sun set at 5 p.m., and the temperature plunged to 18 degrees Fahrenheit, she kept digging under oil lamplight, her shadow stretching across the tunnel walls like someone fighting winter itself. Up at the pit's mouth, a few men shook their heads as they passed. A woman building a tunnel to survive winter in Montana? Never been seen. But a quiet question spread through the valley. Why did Eleanor trust a tunnel more than a cabin? Why did she think the earth could save her where wood had once betrayed her? And most importantly, why did a widow understand something the most experienced men of Timber Ridge had all missed about holding heat? At the end of the day, as the wind howled harder across the hillside, Eleanor kept digging, alone in the biting cold. The steady shovel strikes rang out, defying the community's doubt, as if she were opening the way to a truth that the coming winter would force everyone to see. When Eleanor began building her tunnel home, the work moved beyond just digging a hole into a phase requiring knowledge of geology, soil load, and how cold air moves through valley terrain. She measured tunnel length by pacing, determining 26 feet was needed to create enough distance between the entrance and living chamber to reduce wind pressure and stabilize temperature. Depth had to reach 7 feet to go below Montana's frost line, where soil holds steady at 46-48 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Width of 8 feet was enough for a uniformly curved vaulted ceiling, ensuring even distribution of load from winter snow that could compress down to several thousand pounds. To shape the tunnel, Eleanor used a 4-pound pickaxe to break compacted clay, then a 32-inch steel shovel to scoop it out. She placed 3-inch pine stakes as markers to keep the chamber slope no more than 4 degrees, in case melting snow caused backflow into the home. Once the chamber reached the desired size, Eleanor began constructing the vaulted roof. This was the most critical part, because a wrong angle could let the weight of overhead soil collapse everything. She chose a semicircular curved vault design, as it distributed compressive forces better than a triangular cabin roof. Each 6 feet pine log was placed at an angle, interlaced in a herringbone support pattern, a technique she learned helping her husband repair coal mine tunnels years earlier. These logs acted as the skeletal frame, with flat river stones wedged into every gap to lock the structure. The tunnel's back pressed against the hillside, creating a pressure shadow zone where northwest winds sweeping over the ridge would split and divert, reducing direct pressure on the tunnel face. This was a vital survival factor, since Montana winter winds could hit 45-50 miles per hour, strong enough to suck heat out of a cabin in minutes. After the wood frame and stones, Eleanor coated the walls with clay mixed with dry straw using the hardpan clay seal technique, a way to create a dense, waterproof, low air circulation surface. This layer, nearly 2 inches thick, smooth and even, made every stroke of Eleanor's hand look like the work of a skilled mason rather than a widow fending for herself. Inside the main chamber, she divided the space into 3 parts: living area, stone fireplace spot, and airlock. The airlock was something few in Timber Ridge had ever considered. But for Eleanor, it was essential. She built a double-layer airlock. The outer door was 1.5-inch thick wood, placed about 4 feet from the inner door to block direct wind drafts and prevent snow blow-in. The inner door was smaller, tightly fitted with birchwood. When one door opened, the other stayed closed, stopping cold air from rushing in like it did in regular cabins. Neighbors watched with growing astonishment, but instead of thinking, they chose ridicule. Moles don't even live that deep. Build a house like this, and you'll die in the dirt before winter even comes. Those words drifted on the wind, echoing down the tunnel mouth where Eleanor steadily placed each stone, tapped each log to hear its solid ring. Every passerby saw a widow doing something unnatural for Montana, but they didn't know she was calculating winter sun angles, low sunlight appearing only a few hours daily from the southeast. She angled the tunnel entrance at 18 degrees to catch that rare warmth and raise the airlock space a few degrees. Even the placement of each floor stone had a reason. Eleanor chose 2-inch thick flat stones to evenly conduct heat when she set the stone hearth in the center. Everything had order, purpose, experience accumulated from 15 years living alongside men who built tunnels, mines, and cabins. Yet Hank Dorner, who always boasted 20 years of cabin building and treated his knowledge as the standard, still stood at the tunnel mouth laughing loudly. A woman miscalculates 1 inch and the dirt buries her alive. But Eleanor didn't reply. She just kept working. Each chisel strike, each clay layer, each log placed exactly right. She built in silence. They mocked in noise. Once the tunnel frame was complete, Eleanor moved to the life or death step, building the heating system and turning the entire tunnel into a massive thermal mass. For her, fire wasn't the heart of the shelter. Thermal capacity and heat retention were the deciding factors for surviving Montana winters. First, she selected materials. Granite and sandstone have densities of 165 pounds per cubic foot. Specific heat around 0.19, 0.21 BTU, lb degrees Fahrenheit. That meant raising a 900-pound rock mass by just 20 degrees Fahrenheit could store over 3,000 British thermal units, enough to maintain stable warmth for hours after the fire died. She gathered stones from Timber Creek bed, choosing flat-surfaced, high-compression, uncracked ones. The stone hearth was built right in the chamber center. Firebox diameter about 22 inches, walls 6 inches thick. Centering the hearth created slow convection, something log cabins never had. Cabins produce fast convection as heat rises to the ceiling, then gets pulled out the vertical chimney, forcing constant wood feeding. In Eleanor's tunnel, warm air circulated evenly around the earth walls, stayed trapped, and radiated back into the space. After finishing the firebox, she designed the chimney against conventional thinking. Instead of going straight up, she ran it horizontally 7 feet before letting it rise above the entrance. That horizontal section formed a heat channel, forcing hot gases through thick stone and transferring as much heat as possible before exiting. This way, just 90 minutes of burning could keep warmth for 10-12 hours. Thanks to thermal lag, the rock mass heats slowly and cools slowly. In log cabins, when outside temperature dropped to minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit, the pressure difference between inside and outside made the chimney pull 200 to 300 cubic feet of warm air per minute, dragging away heat people had just created. Cabins always lost to the wind. The tunnel didn't. Eleanor understood that from the night her cabin roof collapsed in 1893, when northwest winds hit 40 miles per hour, the cabin lost heat almost instantly, while the earth held every degree steadily. Soil temperature at 7 feet depth in Montana stays 47–49 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, whether the surface hits -30 degrees Fahrenheit or rises to 90 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. This was ground temperature stability. She didn't need books for just one horrific winter to remember. Earth walls don't shrink, crack, or gap. The dozens of feet of compacted clay surrounding the tunnel acted as a natural heat battery. When the tunnel reached 60 degrees Fahrenheit, surrounding soil absorbed some heat, then radiated it back, keeping the interior stable without constant fire. To ensure fresh air and avoid CO buildup, Eleanor built a small mine-style ventilation system, a 3-inch intake pipe near the floor, facing the hillside to avoid strong winds, an exhaust pipe connected to the chimney end. Heavier cold air flowed in low, circulated around the hearth, warmed, lightened, and exited high. Thanks to stack effect, the stone hearth burned clean, no smoke accumulation, no need for strong chimney draft. This system minimized heat loss from chimney effect. Eleanor tested each section, burning dry grass, tracking smoke direction, measuring wall temperature after 2, 6, and 12 hours. Results exceeded expectations. With just 3 wrist-thick logs burned for 90 minutes, tunnel temperature rose from 48 degrees Fahrenheit to 63 degrees Fahrenheit. After 12 hours, it held 56 degrees Fahrenheit, a number no cabin in Timber Ridge Valley achieved without constant firing. Neighbors watching from afar saw only thin, weak smoke like mist. To them, that proved Eleanor was burning wrong. Smoke that little, and you'll suffocate sooner or later. 900-pound stone hearth in the middle of the house? What does a woman know about heating? Hank Dorner, self-proclaimed 20-year cabin expert, shook his head every time he saw the horizontal chimney. No cabin survives if the chimney doesn't pull the fire. That's the law. But Hank only understood cabins. Eleanor understood Earth. She understood soil density slows heat transfer. Radiant transfer from stone provides more sustainable warmth than convection. Soil at 47–49 degrees Fahrenheit is an anchor, not a threat. And she understood something cabins never had. Earth walls don't betray the people inside at the coldest moment. When the afternoon temperature fell to 22 degrees Fahrenheit in late November, Eleanor did a final test burn. She placed a thermometer on the earth wall, touched the hearth back, listened to the wind outside. The space stayed hand warm. Out there, a winter storm was forming, winds pouring down from the Gallatin Range. In neighbors' eyes, Eleanor's tunnel was a grave. In hers, it was the biggest heat battery she'd ever seen. And as night fell, only a faint strip of light spilled from the tunnel door, the small but powerful light of belief that the coming winter would no longer decide who in her family lived or died. On the evening of the 7th of December 1894, an Arctic cold mass from northern Montana surged south with winds rising from 22 miles per hour to 38 miles per hour, then exceeding 40 miles per hour as darkness fell, turning the entire North Timber Ridge Valley into a wind-catching bowl. Pressure dropped fast. In just 6 hours, temperature fell from 12 degrees Fahrenheit at 5 p.m. to -28 degrees Fahrenheit by 9 p.m. and hit -35 degrees Fahrenheit by midnight, a level Gallatin region folks still saw as the line between recklessness and death. Microclimates in the valley shifted with every slope. Low areas near Timber Creek were blanketed in ice fog, moisture freezing in the air into thick white mist, cutting visibility to 10 feet. Central Valley faced strong wind shear, shredding snow into sharp strips, flying sideways past cabins like knives. Western Hillside saw ground blizzard, wind scouring snow along the surface, stinging legs and knees, so people couldn't open their eyes. Hank Dorner's log cabin, considered the sturdiest, with 2-inch thick, tightly chinked boards, began shuddering in waves. When gusts hit 45 miles per hour, 0.25 0.5-inch gaps between boards sprayed white frost into the bedroom. Indoor temperature dropped from 42 degrees Fahrenheit to near 34 degrees Fahrenheit, despite a roaring cook stove. Each wind blast against the cabin roof sucked more warm air up the chimney, creating chimney effect no one in the valley could fight. Hank's youngest, only 5, shivered violently, breath crystallizing right in front of his face. Hank wrapped him in 3 layers of wool blankets and set him by the stove, but heat still wasn't enough. Neighboring families fell into the same state, bundling children in thick wool, placing them near fires, patting shoulders constantly to keep them awake, because falling asleep even a few hours below 35 degrees Fahrenheit risked hypothermia, even with fire. In another cabin, a bucket of water on the stove froze solid in just 18 minutes as wind pulled through door cracks, creating cold drafts stronger than any fire they could build. Timber Ridge people were used to harsh winters, but this December 7 night felt different. Wind too strong, air too dry, cold like it wanted to choke out every trace of warmth. They thought of Eleanor, not to check if she was okay, but to reassure themselves she couldn't possibly survive in the pit they always called a living grave. But 7 feet underground, a completely different world was unfolding. Eleanor burned exactly 3 logs, each about 14 inches, for 90 minutes. As the fire died down, the 900-pound stone mass kept radiating heat. The earth walls at depth where temperature stays 47-49 degrees Fahrenheit year-round retained most of the radiant heat, then transferred it back into the tunnel space via thermal lag and radiant transfer. When she hung the thermometer on the wall, the needle settled at 62 degrees Fahrenheit and held steady for hours. Outside wind howled like tearing, but inside the tunnel, thin condensation on the ceiling proved a warm, heat-retaining environment. No shaking, no drafts, no creaking wood like cabins, just steady warmth and her son's soft breathing. Still, despite the tunnel's stability, old fears swept through Eleanor's mind. The night her husband died, northwest winds at 40 miles per hour, sucking all warmth from the cabin in minutes, always returned when she heard strong gusts outside. She watched her son sleep deeply, cheeks flushed with warmth, and her heart ached. What if I was wrong? What if winter takes everything again? But placing her hand on the gradually warming earth wall, she knew she was no longer shaken by wind. Near midnight, rumors spread to the East Valley. Has anyone checked on the widow? Cold like this, she's probably dead. One family, the Keeners, grew fearful, thinking Eleanor and her son hadn't made it. James Keener gathered men, Hank Dorner, his brother Mark, and neighbor Bill. They tied ropes around waists, pulled scarves over faces, stepped into the ground blizzard like entering a snow sea. Wind bent their bodies, each step pushed back by invisible force. Ice fog so thick they could see only 5 feet ahead, every breath like swallowing cold needles into lungs. They pressed up the eastern hillside where they'd mocked Eleanor daily. Closer they got, louder the wind howled. None were sure if the tunnel still stood or had collapsed. And if Eleanor was really inside, they didn't know what they'd find, cold or corpses. They glimpsed a faint light 10 feet away, oil lamp glow spilling from the airlock door. But no sound inside, no human breath, no footprints. Wind rattled the earth door with a deep, mountain-like breathing sound. Hank stepped forward, pounded the outer door. No answer. Wind whistling through cracks echoed, raising goosebumps. James pulled the latch. The outer airlock door opened slowly, heavy, creaking. And at that instant, they all recoiled as if shoved. A rush of warm air blasted outward, warm enough to melt frost instantly on their scarves. No one could speak. That warmth in the middle of a minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit night hit their faces like an undeniable truth that the tunnel they'd ridiculed all along was the warmest place in all of Timber Ridge. This was the moment that set reversal in motion. The instant the valley's long-held beliefs about cabins, wood, fire, men, and survival began to crumble before one glaring fact. The widow they'd scorned understood winter better than them all. When the warm air from inside swept their faces, the group stood frozen for seconds. They'd braced for the cruelest sight, a widow and child frozen in silence, but what they met felt like stepping into an autumn room, not a Timber Ridge Valley at minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. James Keener recovered first. He pulled the ice-crusted wool scarf from his face, bent to peer through the inner airlock gap. In the soft yellow oil lamplight, Eleanor Maddox stood at the entrance, wearing only a thin cloth coat, as if it were early fall. No blankets wrapped, no shivering, no blue tint. She just looked at them calmly, warmth radiating from her skin and the earth wall behind her. Hank Dorner was so flustered he forgot words. He'd stood there dozens of times to mock her, saying she was digging her own grave, saying, "Women don't understand Montana wind." But now that warmth was shaking the faith he'd held for 20 years of cabin building. James asked immediately, "What's the temperature in here?" Eleanor quietly stepped aside to let them into the airlock. Outer door closed, inner door opened, and warmth flooded like soft water. On the earth wall, next to her son's straw bed, a thermometer gleamed. James stepped close, raised the lamp. 62 degrees Fahrenheit. The number made them all inhale sharply. Outside still minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. A 97-degree difference, and she'd burned only 3 logs. In their cabins, despite constant firing, it was only 36 degrees Fahrenheit. But in this small space, warmer than many lowland homes, that shock crushed every lingering doubt they'd carried for months. Hank had to say it aloud, voice trembling from cold or shame. How? How is this possible? Eleanor pointed to the stone hearth in the center. The 900-pound mass, still warm, faint orange from dying embers showing fire had been out for hours. Earth holds warmth. Stone stores heat. No wind to steal it away. She spoke slowly, no pride, no blame, just stating the simplest fact in the world. But to the men standing in the tunnel, her voice seemed to deny everything they'd lived by since birth. That cabins symbolized survival, wood the best material, winter yielding only to the strong. Now they stood here, realizing they'd been wrong at the root. Hank approached the hearth, held his hand inches from the stone. Warmth melted frost on his gloves. He traced the 7-foot horizontal chimney, eyes widening as he felt it still faintly hot, though fire had long died. "Chimney runs sideways, holds heat longer," he whispered, voice stripped of confidence. James Keener bent to examine the floor-level intake. He slipped a cloth strip in and saw gentle, steady airflow, not chaotic like cabins. "There's even a ventilation system," he said, utterly amazed. Bill touched the earth wall. He couldn't believe it radiated warmth. He knocked, solid, dense thud, not hollow like wood. "Earth doesn't shrink. No wind leaks," he said quietly, finally understanding why his cabin had been torn apart by wind all night. No one needed more explanation from Eleanor. They saw the truth. This tunnel wasn't madness. It was engineering based on physics, experience, and seeing through winter. What they'd thought impossible turned out simplest. They'd never thought to stop fighting wind and go into the earth. Hank stepped back, bowed his head, then looked up at Eleanor. No more sarcasm, no more arrogance of the cabin expert man. Just remorse. Ego collapse. "I was wrong," he said, voice choked. "Completely wrong." The others stayed silent. They knew it wasn't just Hank, the whole valley had been wrong. Wrong to mock her. Wrong to think women couldn't understand technique. Wrong to believe cabins were the only truth. After minutes in that strangely warm space, they realized the obvious. Eleanor hadn't just survived. She'd proven a method that could save dozens of families. James spoke first. "Eleanor, could you teach me to dig a tunnel like this? My house is too cold. My little girl can't take it anymore." Hank bit his lip, then nodded. "I'd like to learn too." That statement from the man who'd mocked her most was the strongest reversal possible. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She looked at them, then at her son sleeping peacefully on the straw bed, cheeks rosy in 62 degrees Fahrenheit warmth. And she understood. This tunnel hadn't just saved her. It would become what all Timber Ridge needed. As the 5 men stepped out of the airlock, warmth still clinging to their faces like living proof of the truth that winter night had exposed. The woman mocked all autumn was the only one who truly understood what winter was doing to this land. And from the moment that airlock door closed behind them, no one in Timber Ridge ever looked at winter or at Eleanor Maddox the same way again. After that minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit night, Timber Ridge changed completely, as if the whole valley had awakened from a generations-long mistaken dream. People no longer called Eleanor's tunnel Grave Home. They began calling it by a simple but respectful name, Warm Tunnel. The first 6 families came asking her to teach Hank Dorner. The Keeners, Bill and Mara Hafford, Ruth Larkin's family with 2 often sick children, and old Samuel Boyd, whose cabin had shrunk nearly 2 inches after the storm. They all shared one thing. They'd reached winter's limit, and now wanted to learn what they'd once called madness. Eleanor didn't lecture long. She took them straight to the flat land below the hillside, marked depth with wooden stakes, showed how to find frostline the folk but accurate way. Stake the ground each morning, feel hardness and temperature with palm touch. Valley children treated her like a true guide. They ran around mimicking her soil measuring, asking about north winds, winter sun direction. Eleanor never imagined knowledge carried from her life near Ukraine would one day become lessons for a new Montana generation. When ice melted in early March 1895, first pickaxe strikes rang across the valley. Each family dug a small tunnel first, not as deep as Eleanor's, only 5-6 feet to learn soil pressure and collapse prevention. She taught them triangular beam placement for load distribution, flat stone footing, clay straw mixing for hardpan clay seal waterproofing. Men used to axes now sat seriously listening to a widow lecture on lateral loads. No one found it strange anymore. They'd seen her tunnel hold 62 degrees Fahrenheit while their cabins stayed at 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Numbers don't lie. That spring, Timber Ridge looked more like a shared work site than a scattered community. Children packed earth walls. Women wove straw bundles and smeared clay. Men raised wood frames under Eleanor's corrections. That beam's off 2 inches. East wind will crack it. No arguments, no jeers. They fixed it immediately. By May, 4 full tunnels stood complete. 2 others used earth banking on cabins, piling soil 3 feet high against north walls, cutting heat loss by 40%. When they test-fired on May 20, an unusually cold early spring night at 28 degrees Fahrenheit, the results stunned everyone. Dorner House held 57 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 hours on 3 logs. Keener House saved 45% wood from before. Larkin's 2 frail children went through a cold night without shivering for the first time. The next winter, 1,896 came early, temperatures dropping to minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit from early November. But no Timber Ridge family woke at night to feed fires. No child cried from cold. Former damp, ice-cornered cabins now held steady warmth thanks to earth banking. 3 families lived fully in new tunnels and reported average 55-61 degrees Fahrenheit with 50% less wood burned. That efficiency spread wider. People from nearby towns like Big Timber and Columbus heard, came to learn the technique. Many frontier women recorded Eleanor's methods. They said it was the first time a woman-developed survival technique gained full community acceptance. On late fall evenings, Eleanor sat in her tunnel, watching small hearth firelight spread across earth walls. She knew something had changed in this valley. Doubt gave way to learning. Mockery turned to respect. Not just because she survived, but because she made others survive with her. Timber Ridge, once trembling in winter 1894, now entered new winters with rare confidence. No one called Eleanor crazy anymore. They said she was right. And they said that winter, the year a widow's small tunnel defeated minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit cold, was the year Timber Ridge began relearning how to live from the beginning. By spring 1896, the warm tunnel story no longer stayed within Timber Ridge. It started as trader talk along the Bozeman Trail, then reached Homestead Bureau land survey crews. By August 1896, the Montana Star ran a half-page article headlined, "The Widow Who Warmed a Mountain." It described Eleanor Maddox as a technical phenomenon, a widow daring to build against contemporary logic and surviving minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit cold that nearly collapsed many solid cabins. 3 months later, the Kansas Frontier Review picked it up, calling it a turning point in cold region building thinking. Reporters compared Eleanor's work to ancient cold-fighting architectures. Iceland turf houses using soil and sod for thermal stability. Navajo Hogan rammed earth and wood frames for high thermal mass. Chinese Yaodong in the lowest plateau deep hillside digging to tap steady 50 degrees Fahrenheit soil temperature. Timber Ridge suddenly became a stop for people wanting to see firsthand how a widow redefined frontier survival in Montana. In 1901, a young engineer group from Helena measured tunnel temperature in January outside minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside still 58 degrees Fahrenheit after 9 hours without fire. Their report, kept in the Montana Territorial Archive, stated, "Tunnel home demonstrates a naturally stabilized microclimate, low thermal loss, high radiant retention, achieved without any industrial materials. For a world entering industrialization, a pure earth and stone structure, Outperforming log cabins created even greater resonance. By 1909, tunnel home technique was formally included in homesteaders' practical guides under wintering structures for harsh climates, with 5 diagrams illustrating Eleanor's principles: dig below frost line, vaulted load-distributing roof, double airlock, central stone hearth, horizontal heat-retaining flue. Her name wasn't listed, but the entire method bore her mark. By then, Timber Ridge had over 20 partial or full tunnel homes. Each winter, people retold the 1,894 story like local history. Young girls were encouraged to learn wind and sun angle measuring. Children measured frost lines as folk natural science practice. In 1910, when Eleanor turned 60, reporters came to interview her. She said only one simple sentence: "I just did what I needed to live and to keep my son from dying in the cold." But to Montana, she didn't just live. She taught an entire community how to survive. By the 1,920 people looked back and called Eleanor by a formal title. One of the frontier's anonymous engineers, a woman without formal training, but through loss and determination, created a more sustainable solution than the techniques of men who called themselves cabin builders. And her greatest legacy wasn't in the tunnel under Timber Ridge hillside, but in the mindset shift across a region. From building to fight nature, to building to harness it, from seeing Earth as enemy to understanding Earth as heat source. One widow, one tunnel, and 1 - 35 degrees Fahrenheit winter had been enough to change a valley's history. In spring 1895, as the last snow melted into thin water streaks on the Timber Ridge hillside, Eleanor stood at her tunnel entrance. The ground had softened again. Wind carried gentle warmth, and young pines by the entrance sprouted new buds. She placed her hand on the earth wall that had kept her alive through the past winter. It wasn't just shelter, it was proof that life sometimes lies in choices others can't understand at first glance. Far across the valley rang children's laughter as they measured frost lines, men's picks carving new tunnel frames, women mixing clay exactly as she had in last October's bitter cold. Eleanor knew she hadn't changed the world, but she had changed this valley, and that was enough. She looked into the dark tunnel mouth once called Grave Home, and saw clearly a truth that -35 degrees Fahrenheit winter had proven. It wasn't the tunnel that saved her from winter, but eyes daring to see life where others saw only darkness. That was the difference between fear and understanding, between resisting and actively surviving. When we learn to observe earth, wind, sun, things humans long relied on to exist, we don't just learn technique, we relearn our own nature. Eleanor turned back into the tunnel, familiar smell of warm stone and dry earth enveloping her. She knew one day this structure would collapse, like everything human. But the principles behind it, thermal mass, soil temperature stability, heat spreading through stone, would live on in the next generation, in every child out there learning to measure wind with sticks. And for those hearing this story more than a century later, the lesson remains as valuable. Learn from tradition, understand real physics, and value ancestral knowledge, because one day those simple things may save us from our own winters. If you find this story helpful, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss survival lessons and wisdom from the past. Thank you for watching. See you in the next journey.